Gokie kaga desu ka? Watanabe-dan desu. On today's episode of Hollywood Rants, we're going to once again take a look at strong roles for women. And we're going to focus on the profession of female journalist. And we're going to use as our exemplars a motion picture and a television series. The motion pictures is from the 1930s, and it is His Girl Friday. And it was about the world of newspapers. Our television series is The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was on the air from 1970 to 1976 and featured the role of a newsroom producer, also a woman, but in a different side of the business. Let's start out with His Girl Friday. His Girl Friday was made in 1939 and is a remake of Ben Hecht's both successful and notorious Broadway play The Front Page. That had been made into a movie by Louis Millstone in 1931, pre-production code, so it had been able to cover some of the more, shall we say, colorful aspects of the story that would not be available to them in 1939. Director Howard Hawks, though, had come up with a brilliant idea in order to keep the movie relevant and, in fact, make it perhaps even more relevant. And that was that he changed the sex of the male reporter. Instead of Hildy Johnson being a man who's on the verge of getting married, he changed it into the role of a woman being married. Now, this also added another element to the story that really kicked it up a notch, and that is that her relationship with the boss, the managing editor, Walter Burns, can now be viewed in part as a romance. Hildy Johnson in the movie is played by Rosalind Russell. Now, Rosalind Russell was one of those actresses who you could take in small doses, but sometimes she could get to be a bit too much because she was so assertive and so talkative and so very, very specifically of a certain type of woman that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But when matched with the right opponent, she could be dazzling. And she certainly was in this case, because her opponent was going to be played by Cary Grant. Now, Cary Grant is someone who had that debonair air, but he also had that sense of ruthlessness that was probably based on the fact that Archibald Leach, who was, of course, Cary Grant in real life, had started out by running away from home and living a very, very difficult existence before suddenly turning into the very definition of cultured glamour when he came to Hollywood. So we see that they're very well matched. Howard Hawks, as a director, in fact, had been very, very good about putting males and females together in roles where the female was not someone who was just some shrinking violet. He seemed to be really in advance of the feminist movement in terms of making sure that his women were always fully as tough and as aggressive as his male characters. I mean, my favorite Howard Hawks movie, in fact, is his ultimate buddy picture. No, not Rio Bravo, but Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Look at the way Marilyn Monroe and Rosalind Russell back each other up. And we're going to see that played out within this remake of The Front Page. And let's take a look at what the context is of the story. After divorcing Walter and deciding that she's going to marry Bruce, Hildy returns to the newspaper, only to find that everyone is in a turmoil because a man who is accused of a crime and did indeed commit it, but really is not someone who's guilty, is about to be executed. Further, it's clear that the politicians are involved in a corrupt bid to gain more votes by his execution. So this is something that in its own way can be looked at as very timely today. We get to meet the other news reporters, and we see that for those of us who spend any time on YouTube, that they are very much replicated in a lot of the YouTube journalists who are around today. Very irascible. Some of them are willing to be completely derivative of others. Some of them are very, very flowery, and all of them have their own distinct personalities. And this is what keeps this movie timely for today. Now, let's show the various facets of Hildy's character. On the one hand, we see that she's no nonsense. She sees that Walter is desperately trying to break up her relationship with Bruce.
Oh, Hildy, you led me to expect you were marrying a much older man.
Oh, really? What did I say that led you to expect such...
don't worry about it. I realize you didn't mean old in years.
She knows that he's not to be trusted and that he will do anything to get her back because he's got newspaper ink in his veins and he's determined to get this Earl Warren story. But sure enough, there's also a side of Hildy that knows she will never be happy as a housefrau married to an insurance agent in farm country. And all Walter has to do is put that idea in her head, get her hooked on the line in order for her to decide to indeed cover the story with Bruce's blessing. And this is what's interesting. While we've already seen Hildy portrayed as someone who's no nonsense, who has a certain key toughness to her and all of that, we've not had a chance to see her softer and more feminine side, even though Walter had kind of mocked it earlier. So we get to see her interview with Earl Warren, and we see that she is a good listener.
Well, there was one fella,
What did he talk about?
He talked about production for use.
Production for use?
Yes, he said everything should be made use of.
Makes quite a bit of sense, doesn't it?
Yes, I like him. He was a good speaker.
When you found yourself with that gun in your hand and that policeman coming at you, what did you think about?
I don't know exactly.
You just thought of something?
Well...
Could it have been production for use?
She's sympathetic to him. And above all, she cares. And so we know, even though she's going to pretend to just write this story and then head off to Albany, that that's probably not going to happen.
Oh, so you don't know why I'm angry with you? Well, perhaps you better get Louis to tell you the story of his watch. And there's just one other little thing I want you to listen to. Did you hear that? That's the story I just wrote. Yes, I know we had a bargain. I just said I'd write it. I didn't say I wouldn't tear it up. It's all in little pieces now, Walter, and I hope to do the same for you someday. And that, my friends, is my farewell to the newspaper game. I'm going to be a woman, not a news-getting machine. I'm going to have babies and take care of them and give them cod liver oil and watch their teeth grow. And oh, dear, if I ever see one of them look at a newspaper again, I'm going to brain them. Where's my hat?
And during the course of the next 80 or so minutes, we see the prisoner escape. We see him hide in the press office, and we see Hildy and Walter being best buds, coming up with a number of schemes to get their story and to keep him from being executed wrongfully. And as part of all of this, there's a number of other very, very funny moments with Ralph Bellamy as he keeps trying to get Hildy to come with him, and then finally, in exasperation, is ready to give up when he sees that she too, like Walter, has newspaper ink in her blood.
Come on, Hildy, you're coming with me right now.
Give me just a second, can't you? Don't you see this is the biggest thing in my
Keep
life?
quiet,
I
Hildy.
see. I'll keep. I'm like something in the icebox, aren't I?
Yeah.
You just don't love
Oh,
me.
now
that's
that
all.
isn't true. Just because you won't listen, you say I don't love you. Now you know that isn't the point at all.
What's interesting also in this film is to look at some of the other female characters in it. Not that there's a lot. One of the other female characters is Molly, who had been a prostitute, at least in the original play, clearly not here. They kind of make their efforts to make that clear. Who took sympathy on him and kept him in her apartment and actually hid him out for a little bit. And we see that she is played like a typical 30s heroine.
Stop it! Stop it! What are you asking her for? She don't know where he is. I'm the only one that knows.
Where is William?
Try and find out.
Come on.
She's very weepy, she's very hysterical, and there isn't that cool that Hildy Johnson has. The other is Bruce's mother, played by Alma Kruger, who's a gorgon.
Will?
Mrs. Baldwin, Mother, I
Don't
want to
you
tell...
mother me, playing cat and mouse with my poor boy, keeping him locked up,
I can
making us
explain
miss
that.
2 trains, and you supposed to be married tomorrow.
I'll be with you in 5 minutes.
You
Really,
don't have to go with me at all. Just give me Bruce's money. You can stay here forever, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
you
Mother,
and that
please.
murderer you caught.
And ultimately gets carried off by one of Walter's henchmen.
Louis,
Yes, boss.
take the lady over to Pollock Mike's.
My name's Louis Peluso.
Lock her up. See if she doesn't talk to
Walter,
anyone
you can't
on
do
the way.
this.
What'll I tell him?
Tell him it's a case of DT.
Don't worry, Mother. This is only temporary.
So, at the end, we have a moment that looks a little uncomfortable and, in fact, plays uncomfortably today. And that is when Hildy feels that Walter is indeed going to let her go off with Bruce.
Honey, don't cry, please. Oh, come on. I didn't mean to make you cry, honey. What's the matter with you? You never cried before. Hildy.
I thought you were really sending me away with Bruce. I didn't know you had him locked up. I thought you were on the level for once. I thought you were just standing by and letting me go off with him and not doing a thing about it.
Oh, come on, honey. What do you think I was, a chump?
And I thought you didn't love me.
In what I feel is a little bit of a mistake of Hawks in order to make it more palatable to the viewers of the day, we see her realization of this as her being rather weepy. And that's the only false note in Russell's other performance. Fortunately, she quickly picks up and once again is her old self, ready to get on the story. And when it becomes clear that once again their honeymoon for their second marriage is going to be interrupted by a news story, she accepts it. In fact, they might even stay with Bruce. Our second project for examination is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The Mary Tyler Moore Show has a very interesting history involved, and that is that Mary Tyler Moore herself had spent a number of years on the Dick Van Dyke Show where she played the perfect perky wife. But there had always been an element about her that was not common to most wives. For one thing, she wore slacks, and this was something that Mary Tyler Moore insisted on, and it was something that the networks had not really been keen to. But once she started wearing them, it really hit on with the population. So it was clear that Mary Tyler Moore had good instincts about herself. She was also married to Grant Tinker, who at that time was a network executive. And Grant Tinker had one obsession, and that was to get Mary her own TV series. And unfortunately, there was a problem. Most people felt that she was a great second banana, but didn't necessarily have what it took to be a lead. Enter James Brooks, whom you might all recognize from The Simpsons. This was one of his first shows, but James Brooks came up with a brilliant way of handling this challenge. And that is, one of the things about Mary Tyler Moore is she had great reactions. So, rather than do a sitcom in the I Love Lucy tradition, where you're always focused on a lot of crazy things going on, he decided to have the central character, Mary, be the straight man.
You out. But you think that I'm some kind of a pushover, don't you? Yeah. Well, then you're in for a little surprise. Because if you push me, then I just might have to push back. Hard. Come on, you can't carry that off. I know.
Everyone around her was an extreme, but Mary herself was very normal. We see this in the first episode when she's having her interview with Mr. Grant. He is an alcoholic. He's an old school, gruff boss. She's someone who's still believing a lot in what equality and feminism is offering to her, and she refuses to answer some of the very impertinent and inappropriate and illegal questions that he's asking her.
How old are you?
30.
No hedging. No, how old do I look?
Why hedge? How old do I look?
The first episode of the show feels a little uncomfortable. The Rhoda character comes across as being very, very hard and not necessarily likable. And we're introduced to Mary as someone who has just gotten over a bad romance.
For 2 years, through his internship and then his residency at the hospital, Bill let her almost support him.
Phyllis, how about if I asked you very nicely to stop this?
For 2 years, he promised her that the minute he started his practice, they would be married.
Phyllis, would you please stop this?
After 2 long years. Tell her what he said, Mary. Go ahead. After 2 long years, he said,
why rush into things?
In the original writings, James L. Brooks had thought of having her be a divorcee, but TV wasn't quite ready for that. So we also didn't want anyone to think that she had divorced Rob Petrie from the Dick Van Dyke Show. So they had to have her say no to her man. So we have a TV first here. We have a woman who, rather than compromising herself in order to make a man happy, decides to do what's right for her.
Mary, did you just say goodbye?
Uh-huh.
That's what I thought you said. Yeah, well, I'll see you. Take care of yourself.
I think I just did.
It was a really watershed moment in television, and it serves as the initial bonding between Mary and Rhoda.
It didn't work out, huh?
Did Bess tell you?
No, I figured it out for myself. I got this tremendous sensitivity. And you've got this heating duct that goes all the way up to my apartment.
As the series went along, of course, certain people would leave and you had to introduce new characters. And the show got more and more brave. In the second episode we're going to look at today, we're going to look at the Lars affair. Now, this is one from much later in the series. Rhoda has left, and now the Mary Tyler Moore Show is introducing a new character, Sue Ann Nivens, played by the always irrepressible Betty White.
Now, if you want to tidy up in a hurry, think of your living room as a big clock. Start at midnight, and then go around the room working clockwise toward the kitchen. You'll be done in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
Now, here's what's interesting about Sue Ann. She's someone who is the happy homemaker, so she exudes all of the traditional feminine values on her show, but in real life, she's not that at all. In fact, she's an nymphomaniac who has no problem stealing someone's husband. In this case, Lars, Phyllis's husband. And we get to see Betty White in all of her various personalities at once.
And after I add the chocolate to the hot milk, I would love an over-the-head shot looking down into the bowl just as I beat in the 4 egg yolks.
Sorry, Sue Ann, we only have 2 cameras for this spot.
Oh? Where's the 3rd camera?
We need it for the needlepoint demo that follows.
Oh. I'm sorry, Billy, but I cannot do a chocolate souffle with only 2 cameras.
Her ability to be bitchy, her ability to be faux friendly, her ability to be utterly phony, and yet also someone who has a sympathetic side. And we get to see Mary Tyler Moore play off of her. In this moment, we see Mary being pressured because she's up against a deadline to get the situation handled between Phyllis and Sue Ann. And what does she do? She really shows us how a boss needs to act.
Okay, hold it. Sue Ann, listen to me, because I've got to be in a screening room in 45 seconds. Ted already knows about this thing with you and Lars. You know what a big mouth Ted has. And what Ted doesn't tell, I will tell. And pretty soon, it's going to be all over the station. And they're not going to think that that's a terrific image for the happy homemaker. So you see, it comes down to a choice. Either Lars or your show. I've got to go. I will see you later.
And if there was any question that a woman can have a powerful job, this scene answers it. And the answer is a resounding yes. And that throws us into the 3rd episode we're going to look at. And that episode is the infamous, if not the most famous, episode of the show called Chuckles Bites the Dust. In Chuckles Bites the Dust, we see all of the performers working at full tilt. And we see that the show, comfortable in its success, is willing to take some very serious risks. The popular station character, Chuckles the Clown, has been killed in a freak accident. And everyone in the office, because of his weird job as a kitty clown, cannot help themselves but make jokes.
I can just see the insurance claim. Cause of death, a busted goober.
I don't know what you 2 are laughing at, but I'll take a chance it's dirty.
Bert, you're not still making jokes.
The only person who does not find this funny is, of course, our straight man, or Mary. She feels that everyone is being inappropriate. And she even gets lectury at a couple of points.
Just forget what he was wearing. Suppose he hadn't been dressed as a peanut. Would his death still be funny?
Could have been worse. He could have gone as Billy Banana and had a gorilla peel him to death.
Yet we're on her side because even though we're laughing along with the guys, there is something kind of creepy about everyone having such a good time over someone dying. But then we have one of the most ingenious moments up to that point in television history, and that is Chuckles' funeral, where everyone else has gotten all of their stuff out of them. They're no longer cracking jokes or doing any of that. And now, as the Reverend is giving his speech, it is Mary's turn to not be able to control herself.
Peter Peanut, Mr. Fee-Fi-Fo, Billy Banana, and my particular favorite, Aunt Yoo-Hoo. And not just for the laughter that they provided. There was always some deeper meaning to whatever Chuckles did.
It's a human moment. And it was one of those things that made us want to invite Mary into our homes every week. And it is quintessentially why that strength that she shows, that strength where she can stand up to Mr. Grant in the first episode, be strong against Sue Ann, and in this one actually show a human side, is why the show, although it looks not as good as we'd like it to look today because it's filming style and all that, is still a classic. For actresses today, looking at some of these older things, not believing what we read in the industry presses about how, oh, this is really the first time women are allowed strong roles. No, they've always been there. The fact that the industry has been ignoring this fact for the better part of 25 years is really the challenge that needs to be addressed.
And what did Chuckles ask in return? Not much. In his own words, a little song, a little seltzer down your throat.